I decided today to do a full segment on the Israel-Palestine situation and what I think is the solution. We're always talking about, like, the damage that's being done and the fighting and the deaths and the extremism and the problems, but we never really get to the answer. Or when we do get to the answer, I just throw it out there quickly at the end of a segment where I was covering more dense information like, body count and civilian death toll and certain places being attacked, et cetera, et cetera. So in order to get to a solution, we need to first understand what happened in the region and why there are certain beefs from certain communities. So first of all, you need to understand that the creation of Israel happened by the UN in 1947 with what's called the Partition Plan. And of course, Jewish people, they've had a history of being insanely scapegoated and discriminated against, and they had to go through the horrendous Holocaust. And just throughout history, even up until this day, if you look at polling research on this, there's no question that Jews are scapegoated. And if there was a recent poll that that talked about how many people have even met a Jewish person in their life, and it's very few. It was like shockingly few, right? Now, I grew up in New York, in, Westchester County, just outside of the city, so I've been surrounded by a mix of everybody throughout my entire life. Jewish people, Catholic people, all different cultures, all different minority groups, all different races, and I mean, it's a perfect mix of people. So a lot of people are naive when they come from that perspective to the reality that a lot of anti-Semitism exists. So post World War II, there was a question, well, what do we do with the survivors of the Holocaust, and what happens from here? And the UN decided, well, we'll give them Israel in the region, which at the time was the Palestinian territory. Now, the problem with how they did it was there was no consulting of the Palestinians. It's like, all right, hey guys, how you doing? Nice to see ya. Anywho, move on over, Israel is right here. Now, naturally, no matter who you are, you would be like, whoa, what? WTF, dog? That's not cool. You can't just take this region. But that's what the UN did. They basically plopped down Israel in this region of the world, which was the Palestinian territory. And from then on, there was naturally fighting that broke out. A lot of the fighting was started by the Palestinians, and then what would happen is there would be they were naturally and understandably upset because a lot of their land was just taken away, and then the fighting ended up getting larger. There were multiple wars, and along that time, from 1947 until today, Israel basically expanded, and then expanded some more, and then expanded some more, and the borders kept getting wider and wider and wider, and the region, which was Palestinian territories, is now at a historic low. If you look at the map, it's a comically tiny amount of space where the Palestinians are essentially living, and they are under occupation. Now, understanding that history of the situation, the answer becomes today, what do we do from here? Because here's what happens every single time with the fighting that breaks out. What'll happen is a more militant armed wing of groups of people in the Palestinian territory. Hamas is the more militant right-wing, Palestinian group. And what they'll do is they'll lob missiles into Israel. And of course, Israel rightly says, well, that's an act of aggression, and we can't accept that, so we're going to attack back. Now, of course, the argument from the Palestinians is, you're occupying us. So when we lob the rockets, we are doing self-defense. And of course, the Israelis say, well, no, you launch rockets at us, so now we are doing self-defense by responding to your rockets. Now, of course, along the way, what's happened is Israel has become a fucking military powerhouse, okay? They have a tremendous amount of money. They're backed largely by the United States and our tax dollars. We partially funded Iron Dome, which knocks down 90% of the Hamas rockets. So it's not an equal fight at this point, okay? You have Israel, which is basically like Mike Tyson in his prime, versus Palestine, which is like a toddler in the audience who's deaf and blind and has one arm. So for Mike Tyson in his prime to beat up on the toddler, it's not a fair fight, okay? And the idea that, well, we got to do self-defense, what does that mean? To what extent? You want to do a ground invasion and do aerial bombardment for weeks? And you want to kill 800 people, 80% of them civilians, according to the United Nations? It's overkill. And when people say, well, what do you want Israel to do? I don't understand. They're getting missiles lobbed at them. My response is, well, if only they had, I don't know, some sort of a dome, we could call it iron, and it would keep out like 90% of the rockets. Oh, that's right, they do have that. And then look, even if you want to go a step further than that, I understand. Cenk did a good segment about this recently where he said the answer is special forces. That's how you limit the civilian casualties, and that's how you can actually weed out people who may have committed a crime. So, for example, there was a kidnapping and a murder of three Israeli teens recently, and Israel wanted to respond to that. So how do you respond to that? Well, look, you do an investigation and you use special forces. That's the way you limit civilian casualties. To do a broad across-the-board attack because of the rockets being, lobbed into your region, and because of that, well, now in the eyes of the international community, you're wrong because you've killed 80% civilians and you've killed 800 people and you're destroying the region, right? So look, I don't want to get bogged down in the conversation as to, is the violence justified for Israel to do self-defense and for the Palestinians to lob the rockets in what they view as self-defense? Because in all seriousness, the answer is, even though Israel is occupying the Palestinian territories, it's not legitimate for Hamas to fire those rockets, okay? But it's also not legitimate for Israel to do this insane bombing campaign and ground invasion and killing, they fucking hit a hospital and they hit a UN school that was a shelter and they hit some poor kids playing soccer on a beach, and every time their argument is, it's blame Hamas, Hamas has rockets there or else we wouldn't have done it. But wait a second, just because there are rockets there, there are kids and rockets there, your answer is attack anyway because there are rockets there, not whoa, there are kids there, let's calm down here. So the idea is Hamas is using human shields. So blame them. But wait, if it's this diabolical plan from Hamas that's so evil, then why does Israel always walk into the trap? Why is it that, okay, well, fuck it, we'll attack and then we'll say, oh, did we kill kids? We'll blame Hamas anyway. That's not acceptable. You wouldn't accept that if Hamas did it, so why should people accept it if you do it? It doesn't make any sense. But look, again, I don't want to get bogged down in this idea of whose violence is right and wrong, because all violence is wrong. I'm against violence on all sides. So then the question becomes, what's the solution, or how can you get as close to a solution as possible? And here's the answer. First of all, the extremists on both sides are going to have to realize you're never going to get what you want. Let's face it, extremists on the Palestinian side, they've said, well, we don't want Israel to exist. And we want what's it called, right to return, is it? Or we just get all the land back and Israel stops existing. That's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. By the same token, somebody who's a Cherokee or an Algonquin in the U.S. could say, we're tired of, these savage white people who have this land that they call the United States of America. We want it back. Never going to happen. Never going to happen. Yeah, we were fucked up to do it, but we can never just give back all the land. It's just not practical at this point. Israel can't just stop existing. The United States can't just stop existing. So what do? Well, you have to be reasonable and you have to come to some sort of a compromise. So you have to, number one, allow the Palestinians to have a state, okay? Benjamin Netanyahu and the U.S. government blocked non-member UN recognition for Palestine recently. Those were the only two that were against it, the U.S. and Israel. Everybody else in the world said, yeah, give them a state. What the fuck's the problem? But Israel and the U.S. said, no! Unbelievable! It's so crazy. Don't do that. Well, what do you want? And you wonder why there's violence. You're not even allowing them to have statehood. And you're fucking blockading the region, so it's hard for them to get in food and water and just stuff that anybody else would need. They're under occupation. So, number one, they need to have full UN recognition and statehood status. Israel already has that, and they're going to keep that, okay? But then number two, it becomes, where do you draw the borders? Well, I would say you don't draw it at the 1967 borders, which is what a lot of reasonable Israelis want to do. Because honestly, I still think that's too harsh on the Palestinians. I think you need to go all the way back to the 1947 borders, which is what the original partition plan is. If you look at a map of the original 1947 borders, well, what is that? That's essentially 50-50. So what you need to do, this is the solution to the fighting. You need a 50-50 two-state solution, the 1947 borders, and here's what you do. You take the borders and you put a massive UN buffer zone, okay, which essentially is this idea that good fences make good neighbors, and these are the mediators who are going to be there to stop any fighting that may break out. Now, oftentimes people will say, people who are extremists on the Israeli side and extremists on the Palestinian side, they're both going to shriek and yell and bitch about this and say, that's unfair. But that's how you know it's a reasonable solution. The extremists on both sides don't like it, which means what? Rational, moderate minds need to prevail and need to come to this conclusion and say it's okay. Israel, I'm sorry, their extremists want to, eliminate all the Palestinians. Don't take my word for it. Ayelet Shaked, who's an Israeli politician, she wrote a message on Facebook, it got a bunch of likes too, that said, we're fighting all the Palestinian people. They are all the enemy. Wipe them out. A call for genocide. There was another article we covered yesterday. It was in the Wall Street Journal. They argued Palestinian civilians aren't civilians. So get rid of them, right? Well, that's also the Israeli extremists want to see Palestinians eliminated. The Palestinian extremists want to see Israelis eliminated. Well, I'm discounting both of you automatically. You're both fucking idiots, okay? We're never going to get a solution with you guys. So the answer is 50-50 two-state solution, full UN recognition and status, okay? You put a big UN buffer zone in the middle. And finally, here's the only... the fair criticism of my solution. Well, Kyle, there's still going to be violence, and there's still going to be, attacking. And guess what? That's right. That's 100% right. But by the same token, you're never going to eliminate all murder. Murder is a crime, right? You're never going to eliminate all murder. You're never going to eliminate all robbery. You're never going to eliminate all burglary. You're never going to eliminate all of any kind of particular crime, okay? But that doesn't mean you shouldn't come up with the best idea to try to limit it as much as possible. And a 50-50 two-state solution, both becoming members of the UN, that is the best solution possible. It's doing as right a thing as you could possibly do, and it will certainly limit the violence tremendously. And the final thing I'll say is this. There are some people who mean very well. I've gotten this position explained to me from 4 different people now, okay? They say, no, Kyle, you got it all wrong. We don't need a 50-50 two-state solution. What we need is a one-state solution. And honestly, I think this approach is the uber-liberal approach of like, hey, man, why can't we all just get along and hold hands and sing Kumbaya, and there'll be rainbows and puppies, and we can't come together by going further apart and not being under one state. I honestly think that view is silly. Now, again, I think these people mean well because they want a solution. They just want a one-state solution where, you treat everybody equally. The problem is, it's not just deep cultural differences between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It's also deep fundamentalist religious differences between the two. So when you have deep cultural disagreements and deep religious disagreements, it's not something that, is just... you can just get over and you'll be willing to accept the other as legitimate given enough fucking tea parties where you eat crumpets or have enough picnics together. It's not going to happen. Maybe by the year 3612, we will have gotten over the idea of religion and we will have gotten over our ridiculous differences about skin tone and cultures and this and that. But that's not the world we live in right now. And while it's certainly not the case that it's always true that good fences equal good neighbors, sometimes good fences equal good neighbors. Even moderate Israelis don't like Palestinians, and moderate Palestinians don't like Israelis. And you would have wars over just what to name the one state. Once I would say, we're naming it Israel. The others I would say, no, we're naming it Palestine. Then they would do Palest Israel or Israelistine, or they would try to, but they wouldn't agree on anything, man. They wouldn't agree on what fucking color the sky is. So one state is not a legitimate solution. I think 2 is the way to go. You're never going to eliminate the violence, but you cut it drastically if you do a 50-50 two-state solution. Go back to the 1947 borders. And when people say, hey, that's not practical, what are you going to do with all the areas that Israel has taken over and they're settling? Here's what you do. Get the fuck out of there. You shouldn't be there in the first place. You shouldn't have expanded. You shouldn't have done settlements. You shouldn't have pushed past the 1947 borders to begin with. You were wrong to do that. So now, oh gosh, it's so hard for us to take 3 weeks and move away from that. That's too fucking bad. Move away from that, go to the 1947 borders. There's your solution. Now, It's a guarantee that nobody is going to listen to this. Nobody gives a shit. Nobody wants to make these hard decisions and hard choices. But this is the best thing you could do, and it's definitely not going to happen, which is so pathetic and so sad.